It was the night of September 9th, 1980. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and restless, with waves rising like living walls. In the middle of this wild expanse, a giant steel fortress was pushing forward, the MV Derbyshire. This was not an ordinary ship. She was longer and wider than the Titanic, as tall as a 16-story building, and built from hundreds of tons of steel. If anyone had called her indestructible, few would have argued. Yet, within just a few hours, this steel giant would vanish completely. There would be no last-minute distress call, no floating wreckage, no clues. For 20 long years, the official line would be simple. She sank, nothing more to say. But that was far from the truth. The Derbyshire had been at sea for almost 2 months. She had left Canada with over 150,000 tons of iron, or crossed the Atlantic Ocean, sailed past the southern tip of Africa, then through the Indian Ocean, and was now on the final leg of her journey to Japan. On board were 42 people, men who had spent their lives at sea, including engineers, officers, and deckhands. Every one of them was experienced, seasoned by years of facing storms and long voyages. For them, the end of this trip meant seeing family again, stepping onto solid ground, and enjoying the calm of home. In command was Captain Jeffrey Underhill, a man with 2 decades of ocean-going experience. He had faced many storms before, and the sea had never beaten him. He was confident in both his skill and the strength of the ship he commanded. But far out on the ocean, a different force was gathering its power. A storm the size of a continent, Typhoon Orchid. It moved relentlessly across the water, winds screaming at more than 160 kilometers an hour, waves climbing higher with each passing hour. By the time the Derbyshire was in its path, some waves were already taller than the 3-story building, some as long as the ship itself. Captain Underhill knew there was no safe harbor close enough to reach. The only option was to face the storm head-on. He slowed the ship and turned the bow slightly toward the waves to keep her balanced, the way large vessels are trained to do when the sea turns violent. He sent out an emergency weather report, sharing their position and warning others of the conditions they faced. The Derbyshire was built for heavy weather. She was one of only 6 bridge-class ships in the world. Massive vessels designed to carry oil in one direction and iron ore in the other, so they would never sail empty. At that time, she was one of the most modern ships in existence, a floating fortress meant to withstand nature's fury. But out on that black water in the middle of the night, something happened that no one expected. 2 other ships were also caught in the typhoon that night. Both of them would arrive safely at port the next morning. The Derbyshire would not. After her last weather report, the ocean swallowed her whole. Days passed with no word, no sight of wreckage. 6 days later, the first real concern was raised, and an international search began. Helicopters, airplanes, and Navy ships combed the waters near her last reported position, but not a single piece of debris was found. After 6 days, the search was called off. The explanation was short and cold. The sea had claimed her, and there was nothing more to investigate. For the families of the crew, that answer was impossible to accept. The Derbyshire was not some old rusting vessel. She had been built just 4 years earlier at Britain's famous Swan Hunter shipyard, one of the giants of the shipbuilding world. She could carry more than 150,000 tons of cargo, and her design allowed for more profit and efficiency than traditional ships. But in the late 1970s, British shipyards were under pressure from Japanese and South Korean competitors who were building faster and cheaper. Swan Hunter had started cutting costs to keep up. Maybe, the families thought, the truth was hidden somewhere in that. Among them was a man named Peter Ridyard. He was not just a grieving father, he was also an experienced ship surveyor who had spent his career examining ships and the sea. His son had been aboard the Derbyshire. Peter began looking for answers himself. 18 months after the disaster, another bridge-class ship, the Tyne Bridge, ran into trouble in a storm in the North Sea. Steel in her forward section began to crack, and the captain had to order an evacuation. The crew was rescued, and the ship was saved. When Peter examined her, he found deep cracks in the same area at the front. He dug further and discovered that every single bridge-class ship had developed cracks in that same place. Quiet repairs were being made, away from public attention. He also found something even more alarming. Parts of these ships had not been built exactly as the original designs showed. Changes had been made during construction, changes that weakened the ship's structure. Peter gathered all this evidence and sent it to the Department of Transportation. But officials refused to reopen the case, insisting that Derbyshire's sinking had already been properly investigated. They did not want to hear his warnings. The families refused to be silenced. In 1984, they formed the Derbyshire Family Association, determined to uncover the truth. 2 years later, yet another bridge-class ship, the Kowloon Bridge, broke apart near Ireland during a storm. This time, the government was forced to reopen the investigation. For 6 months, experts debated the cause. Some blamed the sea itself, some pointed to possible design issues, but Peter's evidence, the cracks, the design changes, was ignored once again. The final report claimed there was no proof of structural failure. The Derbyshire, they said, was simply another victim of bad weather. For the families, it felt like a slap in the face. But still, they did not give up. In 1994, working with the International Transport Workers Federation, they raised enough money for a private expedition to find the wreck. 14 years after she vanished, they found the Derbyshire lying 4 kilometers below the surface. She was in one piece, resting silently on the ocean floor. For the next 6 years, investigators studied thousands of photographs taken of the wreck. The truth that emerged was heartbreaking. At the very front of the ship was a storage space called the bosun's store, where ropes, chains, and maintenance equipment were kept. The door to this store had not been built to the original specifications. During the typhoon, it broke open, letting seawater pour in. The front of the ship became heavier, pushing it lower into the waves. The force of the water broke the ventilators, flooding the machinery room. Then a massive wave smashed open one of the cargo hatch covers. Once one hold filled with water, the weight pulled the bow down further, causing the next hatch to fail, and then the next. In moments, the giant ship was beyond saving. She sank with all hands, disappearing into the darkness below. The investigation revealed that all bridge-class ships had weak bosun's store doors and fragile hatch covers that did not meet proper safety standards. In the end, it wasn't a massive design flaw that killed the Derbyshire, but a series of small shortcuts. Small compromises made to save time and money that, in the fury of the Pacific, became deadly. Back in the 1970s, ships sank every year, and for the shipping industry, it was almost routine. Losses were seen as part of the business. But the families of the Derbyshire changed that. Their fight forced the industry to face its failings. New ship designs were created. Safety inspections became stricter. Rules became tougher. Many of those rules still exist today because of what happened to the MV Derbyshire, a ship that now lies in silence 4 kilometers beneath the Pacific Ocean.